EASIT, Easy Access for Social Inclusion Training.
Unit 3A, Easy to Understand and Subtitling. Element 1, Processes, Interview with Professionals. This video includes an interview with Kate Dangerfield, filmmaker and PhD student at the University of Roehampton in London. Kate has a background in accessible filmmaking, an area in which she has collaborated, amongst others, with the UK charity SENS, the British Film Institute, the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership at the Open University, and PAL TV. Her accessible filmmaking work was screened at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London as part of the Open Census Festival in 2017. In this interview, Kate talks about the potential use of easy-to-understand subtitles for one of her films, the benefits of taking an integrated approach to media accessibility, and the need to question whether accessibility is really benefiting all viewers.
Hello, my name is Pablo Romero Fresco. I work at Universidad de Vigo in Spain, and it's a pleasure to be here today and be able to interview Kate Dangerfield. Hello, Kate. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks.
So just a brief introduction. Kate is doing a PhD at the University of Roehampton in the UK, where this is a practical and theoretical thesis, so a combination of practice and research involving the making of a film entitled Within Sound and Image. And also we have a written thesis that Kate is writing about it, with the same title plus I think a subtitle, The Theory and Practice of Accessible Filmmaking. Kate, can you tell us a little bit about this project and also about the participants you're working with?
Thanks. So it's practice as research PhD, and I did workshops with 3 different groups of people. I was working with the charity SENS, which is the National Disability Charity in the UK, and the project was funded by the British Film Institute. But we did workshops, 3 different workshops, filmmaking workshops. We had the same starting point, but the participants were free to explore their own ideas, and there were 3 key questions at that stage where we were looking at which equipment was accessible, how they used film as a means of communication and expression, and then how to make the content that they made accessible to them. And I think that's really the focus of today. But what we then did, or what I did, is that I did interviews with people who were either involved in the project or I met through the research, and they were people that would also be considered as disabled people, but not people with learning disabilities. So they commented on they watched the films, they told me what they thought about the project, and but also about their experience with film, whether that's in the arts or in the industry. And so then the documentary is the footage from the workshops, and then those interviews and that discussion.
Brilliant. So there's those 2 layers, right? The participants with whom you made the workshops, and then the kind of experts with maybe different disabilities who were looking at those workshops, watching the footage, and those 2 layers. Brilliant. Kate, could you describe a little bit about, because I remember, as I said before, that when we started this project, you were referring to some of your participants, or you were writing about the participants as deaf-blind participants, but now you are actually talking about participants with complex communication needs. So what's the difference there, and why the change?
Yeah, I think the initial aim was to look at how content could be accessible to deafblind people. That was sort of the initial aim of the research. Mm-hmm. Also, I was working with SENS, the charity, and they considered themselves at that point as a deafblind charity. Mm-hmm. But then actually,
sorry, Kate, but even when you were referring to deafblind at that stage, you and the charity were, just for people who may not have experience with this, we're not talking about fully deaf, and fully blind. Are we, or not only talking about that? We're talking about different degrees of visual loss and hearing loss?
Exactly, different degrees. So some people were, but not everybody. And it was very, very, very different. A really vast difference between the people that I was working with, which you can see through the film. Actually, nobody that I worked specifically was totally deaf and totally blind. But very, very different experiences for each person. And I think Sense is known now as the National Disability Charity rather than the Deaf Blind Charity. So I think there's a shift in that sense, but also looking through the research and looking at into disability studies. I talk about, when I say disabled people, I'd say disabled first rather than people with disabilities. And that's something that's tied up with the UK social model of thinking. And then also, as my position as a non-disabled person, I say complex communication needs, because that's about access, and that's really my perspective, rather than focusing on their impairments. But if I was speaking with them, then I would go by whatever they decided to how they wanted to term themselves.
That's very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that perspective of talking about this, or about them as people with complex access needs, just because that's the way you're looking at the whole situation from your kind of able perspective, of course. That's very interesting. So I would imagine that now one of the challenges is to make the film accessible, of course. Because of the nature of this project that deals with subtitles for easy to understand language, which in this project encompasses plain language and easy to read, how do you see the role of these subtitles in a film like yours, for example? Or what do you think the role could be? And have you considered any, what have you played with? What tools are you thinking about using in order to make your film accessible in general?
Yes, so really, from each course of workshops, we were looking at different forms of access. So the first guy that I was working with needed subtitles, and actually standard subtitles would be totally fine for him.
Okay.
And then, but then the group in Cambridge that I worked with, that actually audio description was more suitable for them. But also their communication, their means of communication was through something called widget symbols. So
can you explain to us what that is, Kate?
Yeah, so that's it's like it's pictures to support speech, or some people use it like as speech. So I'll send you an example of it. But basically they're small cards or small pictures which would have like an activity on, or anything that they wanted to say, and they would use these symbols as a means to communicate or to make choices and things like that.
In many ways that could be seen as easy to understand type of subtitled content, right?
Yeah, I think it's something that I considered at that point of whether or not it could be something, because each workshop was about making that content accessible to the people that made the film. So really focused on individual needs. But so actually for the film that we made with them, we used the widget symbols for the titles, and then really tried to focus on images, and there was very, very little dialogue in their film that we put together. So actually that was something that we thought about like while we were making it, so taking an accessible filmmaking approach in that sense. So it wasn't, the thing is, I think with those widget symbols, which is why we went for that approach, was that they use them and it's static, it's not a moving image, so they have time to consider which symbol they want to use, and then it takes time, and actually whether that's suitable for a film is a totally different situation. And I think you'd have to do a lot of research to work out whether it's suitable or not.
One of the things that strikes me when I watched, the versions that you've shown me about your film so far is that you can't have the luxury of focusing only on subtitles and see if subtitles may be or not simplified in a different way, because obviously you have to combine different forms of access almost at the same time, right? So just to give an idea, and I'm sure we can show some examples in the final edited version of this video, you have used audio introductions, you've used audio description. Sometimes those in themselves are introductions in the film, within the film, to certain parts of the film. You've also used, Kate, you've also frozen some frames, right? Freeze frames, so that you can just pause the film and then describe what's going on. And I guess that description that you're using when you pause a particular frame, then that would need to be subtitled as well, right?
Yes.
So I would imagine that, yeah.
There's time to do that, because then you're pausing the film. Yeah.
Exactly. So then, even if you were to use subtitles that maybe are not simplified, so to speak, the fact that you give him time to read them also helps in many different ways. Okay, and since you're combining all these different options, then does that mean that you're thinking about having all those options combined as an attempt to make one version of a film that is accessible to everyone, to all?
So for my submission, there will be one version, and I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible to everybody that was involved. But that's not to say that I consider it to be accessible to everybody. So yeah, I think then later on I would consider other options of how to make it accessible in different ways. And actually there is going to be two versions. There's going to be another version with there's one version that's integrated audio description, and then there's one version with what would be considered more standard audio description.
Okay, for those who have not heard about this, integrated audio description would be audio description that is maybe not traditional, that is done in collaboration with the filmmaker, and that moves away from guidelines and normally tries to include the audio description as part of an overall description, right? So that it doesn't feel like it's an add-on. Whereas audio description, Kate, if you agree, would be the standard audio description would be more of this kind of added on track that doesn't merge with the narration. It's just kind of intentionally built for what it is, to provide access, right?
That's it, because there's the beginning of the film, which is integrated audio description, which would be suitable. But then I'm exploring other ideas later in the film, and like for instance, there are parts where the sound isn't really good quality. And so actually for somebody who's blind, that's really problematic. Whereas some blind people wouldn't mind if because it's kind of part of the film. And it's a different experience because it's more about the sound and maybe not sort of so specific on what's being said. Whereas people would be happy with that, but then other people would want to know exactly what's being said. So I think that I can't cater for everybody, but I'm going to try as much as I know how to. I'm going to try and cater for the people that are involved.
This is very interesting. And as I hear the answer to your questions, I can't help but think that for people who may be watching this video thinking I was expecting content on subtitles, kind of in easy to understand language, I guess there's two takeaways. One being that it is increasingly the case that when dealing with participants like yours, you can't just kind of separate access services as kind of completely different sections, because it's all part of complex communication needs. So they live with the possibility of using those simplified subtitles actually lives with the rest of the access services, right? So everything needs to be considered holistically as a whole, and then you maybe be able to choose what you need. So that's one of the things that I was thinking. And related to that is the fact that you seem to be given up on the possibility of creating a version that caters for all. And I wonder whether we are actually guilty of, because of the catchy nature of the slogan "for all," guilty of using it in a way that maybe is not completely accurate, because it seems very, very difficult to actually provide one version that is accessible to all. In some of the videos that we've had as part of this project, we've heard the usual discussion of whether these simplified subtitles could be the version that everyone uses, or it could be an alternative version to more standard subtitles. So, two questions to you would be: the first one, do you think that first of all, actually, are you giving up then on the idea of one version for all? Do you think that's just not possible, and that we have to actually come to terms with the fact that if we want to get to everyone, then we will need more than one or two versions? We'll actually have to start thinking about that. What do you think?
That's from the research and from the people that I've worked with. Even so, say around 10 people in the workshops, and then the sort of 4 people that were involved in the interviews. And even on that such a small scale, it's still not possible to find a way that is accessible for all those people. So there's things that there has to be compromises throughout. So yeah, I think it's not giving up on access, but it's giving up on the idea that it's possible to.
Absolutely. No, I don't see that as I don't see that in despair, and I don't see any kind of loss of hope there. So I don't come out with a negative feeling. I just think that it's first questioning the idea that the for all, or actually bring in here the idea that the for all may be catchy but not very accurate, and that if we do want to actually cater for all, then we're going to have to start thinking about catering for almost everyone, which means making distinctions. And your case is very illustrative because you're dealing with only 10 participants, and you're already telling us that the difference within them, who have been kind of addressed as deafblind first and people with complex needs, so they have been pigeonholed as something, and you can't even reach them all with just the one version. So
and also how it changes, like for instance, one of the participants that I was working with in the first workshops, he was using subtitles at the beginning, but actually then had his hearing aids were tweaked, and he wasn't using subtitles by the end of it. So also it's this change over time as well. That's they're not really things that you can pinpoint.
Yeah, this is. It sounds very complex, but also fascinating, because it really means that we're going to have to start thinking more individually about the different needs, as opposed to just maybe thinking of big groups that, whether we like it or not, are not heterogeneous at all. So when you do start thinking about that, when you do start thinking about having those people in mind who you want to get the film to and make it accessible to, then is the use of easy to understand subtitles a possibility in some of the versions of the film?
I would definitely, if somebody contacted me, because I think what I'm planning to do is I'll put the film out with the access that I can, and then say that if people need other access, if people have other access requirements, then to contact me, and I can try and arrange that. But I think it's a possibility. If somebody came to me and asked for it, I would consider it.
Mm-hmm. And Kate, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who maybe watching this without prior kind of knowledge about your project, and maybe thinking, whoa, that's amazing. I mean, from the point of view of looking at and speaking to what I would call an accessible filmmaker, accessible in many different ways, but in this case about media access, an accessible filmmaker who is considering obviously we can't expect many people to have your views, because you've been trained in media access but also in filmmaking. You have an understanding of the complex needs that many different individuals may have. But so in your case, this is, from our point of view, it's fantastic to hear this, but how scalable is this? How can we have how can we ensure that we have more filmmakers who are aware of all this? And do you not think that they'll be thinking, God, this is too much? How can I be expected to provide a specific version with a specific form of access for a specific person? How is that? I don't know. How can we keep this up?
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing is that it's a shift in thinking, and that doesn't happen overnight, and it's sort of one step at a time with everything. So if you are interested in making things accessible, then possibly look at one thing first, and keep trying, and I think quite often it's difficult to always get it right, and I think just to keep trying different options and getting feedback from people. But I think I
agree, Kate.
It's a shift in thinking that also just doesn't need to just happen in terms of filmmaking and media accessibility. It's about just generally everything being more inclusive. So it's a shift in thinking that needs to happen generally.
I agree, Kate, and I tend to think, when I talk to you about these things, I tend to think that obviously when we talk to filmmakers, first they need to know about access, very general access, and about disability in general. So you start with the basics, then you take them on a journey to where we are in media access, which is to the idea of, okay, we have audio description, we have subtitles that could be easy to understand subtitles. We can do this in collaboration with filmmakers. That's you take them, but then we can take them a little bit further, which is where you are, in my view, which is fine. But the for all slogan may not be working, because when you look at individuals, then you're leaving a lot of them behind, and then there's a need for more kind of individualized type of access and looking into more of the trees rather than just the forest, not so much as a group.
Exactly. And it might be more encouraging without the for all over it, because actually that's pretty daunting. If you're saying suddenly to a filmmaker, this has got to be for everybody, maybe that's when people shut off. So,
and it could be disappointing. The for all could be disappointing for those who are meant to be within this all and are not there or cannot have access, right?
You're striving for something that's not possible.
Absolutely. So, Kate, well, thank you very much for being here today. It's been fascinating to hear about your project, to hear how it relates to this project, and to hear about the possibility of you using these type of subtitles in one way or another once there's a need for it. So we'll be keeping an eye on what you do and how you do it. And from a personal point of view, it's fantastic to see somebody who has such awareness of the complexity involved in access, and who's also working from the filmmaking side of things, because, we need more people like you, Kate. But yeah, it's been great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been really interesting.
No worries. Good luck with your project, and we look forward to reading it and to watching the film. So thank you very much, Kate.
Okay, thank you.
This video was prepared by Pablo Romero Fresco from Universidade de Vigo and Kate Dangerfield from the University of Roehampton, and produced by Jesús Meiriño Gómez from Universidade de Vigo.
The project EASIT has received funding from the European Commission under the Erasmus Plus Strategic Partnerships for Higher Education Programme, Grant Agreement 2018-1 ES01 KA203 05275. The European Commission's support for the production of this publication does not constitute an endorsement of the contents, which reflect the views only of the authors, and the Commission cannot be held responsible for any use which may be made of the information contained therein. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Share Alike 4.0 International License. Partners of the EASIT project: Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, Università degli Studi di Trieste, Universidade de Vigo, Stiftung Universität Hildesheim, SDI München, Dyslexie Verbundet, Radio Televizija Slovenija, Zavod RISA. EASIT, Easy Access for Social Inclusion Training.